he's looking at me like he's already up here. He's already up here.
We're watching you. We're watching you.
Have a seat. You want me to get the My Vanishing Country?
Sure.
Let me get it for you.
Good afternoon. What's going on? Y'all doing all right today? My name is Bakari Sellers. Like she said, I am a father, a husband, actually not in that order, a husband, a father, a political commentator on CNN, retired politician for now, I guess. I'm a former member of the South Carolina State House of Representatives. People like to remind me often that I was the youngest state legislator, thank you, in the country, and the youngest black elected official in the country back. I actually won my race in 2006 when I announced when I was 21 years old. I told my parents, this is a true story, I told my parents I was going to run for office. After I graduated college, I graduated when I was 20. I went to college when I was 16, went to high school when I was 12. Graduated when I was 20, and I came downstairs and told my mom and dad I was going to run for the South Carolina State House of Representatives. And I was running against Thomas Rhodes, who was 82 years old, and had been in office for 26 years, which was longer than I had been born. And when I told my parents, my mom said she'd vote for me, and my dad said he'd think about it. So I had a long way to go. And on June 13, 2006, I actually won my race, you know, getting some of those accomplishments, and then served for 8 years. Then I was a Democratic nominee for lieutenant governor in 2014, and the reason I'm sitting here with you all today is because I lost that race. But I digress. This is my first foray into writing. I've actually never felt this one before. This is the paperback copy of My Vanishing Country, which is pretty cool. Like, it's nerve-wracking. When you first get a copy of the book, your heart begins to beat extremely fast, because I literally told absolutely everything about myself in this book. The ups and downs, the all-arounds that I have growing up, my successes, my disappointments. I talked about my suffering from anxiety in this book. I talked about my wife almost dying in childbirth in this book. I talked about the Orangeburg Massacre. Do you care which chapter I read from? No, but thank you. You know, I have a couple of chapters in this book that I really like. The first chapter is a really good, well-written chapter. But I'm just going to read a couple of pages from The Wounds Have Not Healed Yet. And it's Don't Be a Dead Hero. February 8th, 1968 is the most important day of my life, even though I wasn't born yet. And in this first chapter of this book, after the introduction, I kind of start there. I start with not necessarily where my life began, but where my life began to be molded even before I was born. Here it goes. February 8th, 1968 is one of the most important days of my life, even though it was 16 years before I was born. That day, about 200 black students at South Carolina State College attempted to desegregate an all-white bowling alley in Orangeburg. After several days of protest, highway patrol officers lined up along an embankment and fired into the group of unarmed students. They killed 3 young men, all age 18 or younger, Samuel Hammond, Delano Middleton, and Henry Smith, and shot and wounded 28 others. The tragedy took place in 8 to 10 seconds, the time it takes for 2 sips of coffee or to tie your shoe. It's the amount of time a bull rider must remain on a bull to score. Sociologists say it takes 8 seconds to make an impression on someone, and it took that amount of time to shatter so many lives. In those few seconds, the sky lit up with gunfire. Students fled for their lives as they were being pelted in the back, in the head, and in the soles of their feet with buckshot from shotguns hunters used to kill large game like deer. One youngster was shot in the face, knocking out 16 teeth. Bullets pierced another's heart, and yet another, a high school student waiting for his mother, a maid at the college, was hit 6 times. The shooting stopped as fast as it started, but for some, it never ended. One of the people wounded that night was Cleveland Sellers, my father. He was a young, married civil rights activist at the time. My daddy was arrested, thrown in jail, and was the only person to spend time in prison for instigating a riot that never happened. My parents have always talked to me about the Orangeburg Massacre. I'm pretty sure it was whispered to me when I was in my mother's belly. I've also heard the story from the mouths of those who were wounded that night. I've heard it from the relatives of the dead, and of course, I've heard it from the agitator himself. And with each hearing, I always discover something new. I'm a child of the civil rights movement. There's a photograph of me in the arms of Uncle Jesse Jackson, who was holding me while I fed a horse. I was the campaign baby during his second run for president in 1988. Do y'all remember how babies used to wear them little white shoes? Hard-bottom white shoes. Y'all know about those? And I had on red overalls. That's what I was wearing in that picture. Lord have mercy. He was just one of my many aunts and uncles, all of them legends and famous in their own right. I grew up answering the phone and then saying, "Dad, Uncle Julian," for Julian Bond is on the phone, or Uncle Stokely, Stokely Carmichael wants you, as Aunt Kathleen, Kathleen Cleaver. And while those aunts and uncles inspired my success, they also connected me to the past, providing me with a useful playbook for the years to come. My sister was right. I was a strange child, a very old soul. My father was intentional with me, and I was receptive. He never stopped showing me the realities of life. Maybe my sense of purpose was developing sooner and faster than in most children. As a result, my early knowledge of the injustices of the civil rights era had left me with a heavy heart, even as a child with so many tears, but also with hope and a mission. My father's path and my own are tangled together over some bloody ground. My goal, like his, is to help heal this nation's divide. So, in this chapter, I actually lay out the Orangeburg Massacre, which is the most violent civil rights demonstration this country's ever seen. My father, uniquely enough, and I talk about it more in this book, my father started in the civil rights movement very young. When he was 10 years old in 1955, something happened that fundamentally changed his world. How many of y'all have y'all phones on you right now? Take your phone out. I don't care if your phone rings when I speak. I have stock in Verizon, so it don't really bother me now. But go to Google and Google Emmett Till casket photo. Yeah, and so before y'all could go viral on Instagram or, my bad, I know it's buzzing, my fault. Before y'all could go viral on Instagram or Twitter or Snapchat, back then you could go viral only in Ebony magazine. And if you look at his casket picture, you see it? Everybody got it? Oh, y'all didn't pull it up? Here you go, I'll show it to you. That bottom picture.
I've seen that already.
Yeah. So that's a picture of Emmett Till. He was a 13-year-old boy that allegedly whistled at a white woman, but we now know that as she was trying to get into heaven, she notified the world that wasn't necessarily true. But in 1955, it was in Ebony magazine, and my father folded it up and put it in his wallet. It spurred his activism. He ended up going to Howard University and dropping out of school, befriended a man named Stokely Carmichael and joined SNCC. And then he was involved in the Orangeburg Massacre. Uniquely enough, after February 8, '68, the night of the massacre where my dad was shot, he went to the infirmary, and he was wounded pretty bad from the massacre. He was shot in the shoulder, but you know, he tried to go to I don't know why you get shot with a shotgun and go to an infirmary, but they sent him to the hospital, and when he got to the hospital, he was pointed out by the only black sheriff's deputy in Orangeburg County at the time, and they arrested him. And they charged my father with 5 felony counts. He was looking at a maximum of 75 years in prison. And they transported him from Orangeburg, South Carolina to Columbia, South Carolina, which is about 40 miles. And before they put him on the highway, they blocked off the entire interstate and made everybody who was on the interstate get off. And they treated my father as if he was they called him an outside agitator because of his involvement in the movement, and everybody knew he was involved in the movement. And they denied his bond. And while they denied his bond, they housed him on death row. So my father sat on death row for about a month in isolation because they didn't want him in general population because they were afraid that he was going to be a rebel rouser or something. When he got out on bond, uniquely enough, this is where I'm going with the story, all the officers who fired shots into the group of students were charged. It was the first and only time in this country's history that anybody had been charged with federal civil rights crimes for shooting unarmed black folk. They were all found not guilty in like less than an hour. My father actually went and got his master's degree from Harvard. And I joke all the time, and he doesn't find it funny, but I do, that he was the only person on the yard with a master's degree from Harvard. and he ended up going to trial. They backdated the indictment from February 8th to February 6th, which was the first night of the protest. They dropped all the charges but one, and my father was charged, tried, and convicted of rioting. Hence, I say he became the first and only one-man riot in the history of this country. It was the second time my dad had gone to prison. The first time he went to prison was this really cool picture. You know, this book was supposed to have pictures in it, but Tracie made the decision to take the pictures out. I'm still mad about that. But one of the pictures that was going to go in it, my dad got all dressed up, went down to Atlanta to the draft office, and he refused to go to Vietnam. He had on his black leather coat, turtleneck. It's like he was getting fresh for his mugshot. He got arrested on the spot and served like 7 months in prison he, like many during that time, did not believe that they should be fighting in Vietnam. Let's see. So that's the story of kind of the beginning of my life, even though I wasn't even born yet. It's kind of surreal how things that happen before you, I'm trying to find this. Here we go. Boom. Can change your life. I'm gonna read a piece from A Voice for the Voiceless because I always tell folk my life, uniquely enough, has been booked in by tragedy. So February 8, 1968, where 3 young men were killed, Henry, Samuel, and Delano. 28, including my father, was shot. And then I always talk about this incident. It's chapter 9. It says, we're politically spoiled in South Carolina, which is absolutely a fact. Because we're home to the first Southern primary, which means we get to meet all the presidential candidates right out the gate. This is a very eerie day. But on the night of June 17, 2015, I attended a fundraiser in Charleston for Hillary Clinton. The event was hosted by celebrity lawyer Akeem Anestapula and his wife Constance, right on the water where the ships come in on East Bay. The house was beautiful, and I naturally admired their full basketball court. When you walk in, to the left is all glass, and they just have like it's like a full basketball court right there on the water. It's kind of dope. Every big state Democrat was there. I talked to former Governor Jim Hodges and Mayor Steve Benjamin of Columbia. Jill Fletcher, my fundraiser, and her mother Candy accompanied me. Of course, we were all there to see Hillary. Stay with me on this, okay, guys? At the conclusion of this event, sometimes close to 9, I asked Mayor Benjamin and his driver, a Columbia police officer, whether Ike could follow behind his car. And as we made our way back onto Meeting Street, which turns into I-26, we noticed something strange. Emergency units, police cars, and other law enforcement vehicles were blazing by us in the opposite direction. It was a blur of unending lights, sirens, and police cars that seemed to go on for miles. Then I found something shocking on Twitter. 9 people dead in Charleston Church. I needed to find out what was happening. I called to check on Jill and Candy, who had left earlier for dinner at Hall's Chop House. Are y'all all right? I asked them. We're okay, but the city seems to be on lockdown, Jill said. Then I received a devastating call from Tyler Jones, a friend and member of the South Carolina Democratic Caucus. There's been a shooting at Mother Emanuel, and Clem's been shot, he said. The last time I had seen Mother Emanuel's senior pastor had been the Fish and Grits meet and greet about 7 months before Vincent Shaheen during our run for governor and lieutenant governor. I started making more phone calls and found out that 9 people definitely had been shot at Mother Emanuel, and many were dead. But I couldn't discover specifically who was dead. I reached Kelvin Washington, the U.S. Marshal, and I talked to State Attorney General Alan Wilson. I believe they were keeping me up to date because there was the potential that as a major candidate for statewide office, I may be called on to comment. Soon enough, to our horror, we learned that 9 African Americans had been killed by 21-year-old white supremacist named Dylan Roof. When he walked into Mother Emanuel earlier that night, he'd been warmly welcomed to join the Bible study. In fact, he'd been asked, he asked for Clem and sat next to him. After nearly an hour, when everyone closed their eyes for the benediction, he started firing a .45 caliber Glock pistol. He shot Clem first, and he shot many others, even pumping 11 rounds into an 87-year-old woman. After nearly everyone was injured or dead in the room, the shooter kept firing rounds. That Wednesday night, we didn't know any of this yet. Neither did we know Clem's wife, Jennifer, had been in the pastor's office with their 5-year-old daughter and was probably still cowering there when I first saw the emergency crews rushing by. In the coming days, we learned from her cousin that Jennifer heard the shots and hid with her child under a desk. Don't say anything, she demanded of her daughter, placing her hands over her child's mouth. Then we started to hear whispers of a survivor. We learned later that the killer walked up to Polly Shepard, a retired nurse, and asked, "Did I shoot you yet?" When Polly told him no, he said he was going to keep her alive to tell the story. But as the evening of June 17th drew darker, the story was an unraveling mystery. And as crazy as this night may sound now, we didn't know at first whether it was a hate crime. Everyone was still trying to process what was going on. In part, I think we were in shock. The national media already in town for Hillary Clinton and for the Republican presidential candidates who were coming to the state were clamoring for reports like everyone else and for answers. The city had no time to adjust, and so we were suffocated by a tsunami of national media. So I was actually about a mile away when the Charleston massacre happened, and Clem actually was one of my really good friends. They were sitting in I didn't like this, but in a circle in the church. And Dylan was a straggly white boy. I don't know if y'all have seen pictures of Dylan. He was a straggly white boy, came in with a book bag, and he just sat down, asked for Clem, and sat down next to him. And when they said the benediction, they bowed their head to pray, shot Clem in the neck, and then shot the rest of them. And we didn't know until, it started coming out later on, and he was enveloped himself in a Confederate flag, and he had a list of churches and all of those things. The unique thing about, it's not in this book, but the unique thing about the story is kind of how life goes full circle, because I'm a lawyer as well, and I'm a civil rights lawyer. And those 9 individuals, plus there ended up being 5 survivors. There was Polly and Felicia, and one young lady who I still cannot share her name. She was she was 9 when it happened. She was 9 when it happened. She's still a juvenile today. Yeah, she was 9 when it happened. She was in the room as well. And then you had Jennifer and Jennifer's daughter, who were in the pastor's office. So those 14 individuals, I ended up representing them in a lawsuit against the federal government that we settled in November of last year for $88 million. And so although it's not justice, we'll never bring, we would give the $88 million back, of course, to get Clem back and those other 8, but at least it's some semblance of justice. And so My Vanishing Country is a memoir. It talks about my political career and the ups of winning elections at 21 years old, but it also talks about some of the tragedies and bookend of tragedies like Orangeburg and like what happened in Charleston, and trying to overcome all of those things. And the last chapter is about 2016. It gives you like a political analysis. And the last thing I'll read you is my afterword. Because when you write a book, they take so long to print that so much in your life changes by the time you finish writing your book, so they become a little stale. So people write what's called afterwards. And I wrote a 2-page afterwards. I read a little bit. We're not sure where Sadie and Stokely got their large eyes from. Those are my little people. They're 3 years old. When they look at you, it's like they're peering into your soul. Maybe their wise gaze comes from them entering the world, fighting, overcoming, and now they're just watching for their mom and dad to make their next move. After my wife barely survived their birth in January 2019, we were all able to go home, but the visceral terror of our next chapter had only begun to unravel. Ellen and I watched Sadie die a little bit every day. Sadie was born with biliary atresia, which is a rare condition in infants. Simply put, it's a disease of the bile and liver ducts. The illness strikes about 1 out of 12,000 babies. The first year of Sadie's life was brutal for all of us, but she's strong just like Ellen. I find it sadly poetic that Ellen's mother would wrestle for her life to ensure our 2 babies got here, and that little Sadie would work just as hard to make sure she stayed. Stokely, my boy, is strong in his own way. Because we had to pick up and move, he was without us for a long period of time. Meanwhile, Sadie got sicker, but there was nothing we could do. There were nights when Ellen would ask, did God give us a baby just to take her away? We were questioning faith and doctors. We were questioning everything, but in the end, all we had was God, our faith, and the good physicians at Duke University. We waited and waited for a transplant. It was my job to make sure Ellen could make it day by day. Sadie's belly got really big. She was so thin and her skin turned yellow. Those months of waiting were pure hell. We were on the donors list for 93 days. And so I talk about the fact that we go from my wife almost losing the kids to then my daughter having a liver transplant. Boy, this book is traumatic as hell. I'm just now realizing this. I hope people read it with a therapist. I have a therapist, so I hope people read it with one. But that's just the story of my life and being able to be here with you guys and telling you that you can come from Mount Vernon or Denmark, South Carolina, where you have 3 stoplights and a blinking light, and still be able to do some of the things that I've been able to do, which is hang out with Don Lemon at night on TV or be really close with the 44th president and 42nd president of the United States of America. I remember we were going for our 1-year biopsy with Sadie, and the first call I get at 6:30 in the morning is from Kamala Harris. And so you can have all of these experiences. And this is my first New York Times bestseller. And then The Kids I read earlier was my second New York Times bestseller. And so to have 2 New York Times bestsellers before the age of 38 is not bad. And I say all of that to say that don't let your zip code determine what you are in this world. And I need a lot of help changing the world because right now it kind of sucks. And so if you guys can help me change the world, I promise that your name may not be in lights and you may not be rich, but at least somebody somewhere will be able to say, job well done. We got time for questions. You guys have any questions? Yes, ma'am?
So like your dad being who he is as an activist, do you think that kind of set the path for you to become who you are, like a politician for civil rights and stuff? Or
Yeah, no question. I mean, I think that having a hero in my kitchen every day was a plus. Both my mom and dad they went to college. They taught in college. I used this word earlier, insatiable. I almost hit myself for using an SAT word this morning, but they taught us to have this insatiable desire to learn as much as possible, read as much as possible. And they taught us this important thing, like no matter what you are in life, be a change agent. Everybody's not gonna do that. Like all of y'all ain't gonna wanna change the world, and that's fine. I mean, if y'all wanna be rich and go live in the suburbs and relax, I mean, you have every right to do that. That's cool. I'm not gonna knock you for it. But there's a greater responsibility for those of us who wanna take it on. And I think that you have to live for those people who can't live for themselves.
Okay.
Yep.
So on top of like everything that went on in your childhood, do you think it made it harder with the additional problems like caused with your father, or like the problems that happened with your father? Did it make it harder?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the probative value outweighs the prejudicial value, meaning that, yeah, some of the things got more difficult, but having him be there, having him have that history and that legacy, it far outweighs any of the knocks that come with it. My father, one of the things people don't realize is that when you're in the South, my father didn't get pardoned until 1990 or 91, or maybe 92, the early 90s. I was like 6 or 7. So he had a felony on his record for 16 years. So you can imagine being a black man in the South with a felony on your record. So it was difficult. It was more difficult, and I'm not sitting here trying to write my rap story. It was more difficult for my brother and sister at an earlier age, because my mother was in news and she kind of made ends meet, and my father was at the housing authority and other things. But you just had to live and make do. I saw a hand. Was yours up? Yes.
This might be a simple question, but if your life wasn't filled with such hardship and loss, would you still want to fight for the right reasons, for the rights of everyone?
I don't know the answer to that question. I can only take what God has given me. That's a really good question. That's decently profound. I haven't thought about that. But I also don't necessarily, my mind's not really geared that way. I am not someone who thinks about yesterday too much. And I'm also not somebody who thinks about tomorrow nearly at all. I firmly believe in making the most of the moment that you're in. I live 24 hours at a time. I believe that you can only eat an elephant one bite at a time. The worst question you can ask Bakari Sellers is, where will you be in 5 years? Because I have no earthly idea. But I have this theory that, like, for me to have a good life, I have to win more days than I lose. And so I focus on winning the day. And if I can win 6 out of every 10 days, if you shoot 60%, you're going to the Hall of Fame. I just feel like that's really good. And so I focus every single day on trying to win that particular day. And I live in the moment. A lot of people don't take advantage of the moment that we're in. And part of my understanding of life being extremely short is that I live in those moments. I'll take a couple more questions. Yes.
Do you think this relates to what is being taught more in schools? Because the massacre that you brought up, I literally never heard of
Yeah.
it.
Nobody, I mean, yeah, they don't want you, there is a concerted effort for you not to learn about our history, which is why I wrote our children's book, which is no longer over there, and why I wrote this book. There are a lot of historical nuggets in this book. I hope you all get a copy and are able to read it, but you will get a copy and will be able to read it. But there are a lot of things in this book and a lot of people and names you probably never heard of. But of course, I mean, we have to learn from our past. One more question. Yes, ma'am?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm asking this question on behalf of my son who cannot be here right now.
Yes, ma'am.
He's viewing. Has he traveled the world talking to other children about his books, and what did he wish he had known at 16 years old, because I am 60?
Oh. So at 16 years old, so I don't live life with regrets. At 16 years old, y'all know what I was doing at 16 years old? If we're going to keep it 100, you know what I was doing at 16 years old? I was a freshman in college at Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia, where you could get into any club with a college ID.
Oh, God.
I was losing my mind at 16 years old. I played a little college basketball. I was just trying to figure out life. At 16 years old, what I would tell myself, which is what y'all would figure it out, but what I would tell Mom is that give him some grace, because he will find what he wants eventually. We all find our niche. And I would probably tell you guys that you guys need to give yourself more grace too. How old are y'all?
17.
So like if you were born in, and all y'all were born in the 2000 ands, right? Which blows my mind. Like 2001. I'm like, there's more? Like, oh my God. But if you were born in 2000, like think about this, and this is what I want the teens to think about. You've lived through 9/11. You've lived through a housing crisis and bubble. You've lived through a recession. You've lived through the first black president. You've lived through the advent of the Tea Party. You've lived through school shootings, Sandy Hook, Parkland. You've lived through the greatest mass shooting in the history of the country in Las Vegas, Nevada. You've lived through Donald Trump. You've lived through a pandemic. You've lived through another recession. I'm sure I'm missing some things, but y'all are still here, right? And I think that you guys deserve a lot of credit for making it this far. And there are a lot of older folk, adults, who don't give you the benefit or the grace of being here and still making it. You guys have seen and lived through a lot. So it's okay to sit back and be like, all right, I've done something. Give yourself that grace. Take a breath. Pat yourself on the back. And then understand that because you have the strength to make it through that, there's literally nothing that can stop you. At 37, the past 3 years have been hell. But that's just your teenage years for y'all. Yes. One more question. Who, you had? You
said you achieved a lot. What kept you motivated?
I didn't say I achieved a lot. Other people do. I refuse to count. I don't know, man. What keeps me going? I mean, just trying to make my mom and dad proud. Now I have kids, so trying to make them proud. Living one day at a time, trying to make y'all proud. Now I can't go out there and mess up because, my friends from Mount Vernon are gonna be like, man, we knew he wasn't real. So just trying to live for others. I have 22 tattoos. I actually write about it in one of the chapters of my book. It was literally one of the more shocking things that my mom knows about my tattoos. My first tattoo was a portrait of my dad, and my mom was pissed. You know why my mom was mad? Because my tattoo was of my dad and not of her. She was not mad that I got a tattoo. She was mad that it was a portrait of my dad. But I have 22 tattoos, and one of my tattoos is a quote from Einstein. It's right here on my bicep. It says, "Only a life lived for others is a life worthwhile." And so that's something that I ascribe to make sure that I do. So with that, I'm headed to the airport because I have to kiss my babies tonight. And so anybody got a burning question one they gotta have? All right. Well, let me just say thank y'all, because y'all gave me a little bit of your time, so I appreciate you so much. I think we're going to go to the back and take some pictures.